The level of restrictions they're looking to put in place is so restrictive and so onerous that it's going to make it really hard for growers to continue to use these tools.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the State of Soy. I'm Aaron Putsey. We're reporting to you from downtown Des Moines at a meeting of the American Soybean Association, and I'm visiting here with Kyle Kunkler. Kyle serves as the Director of Governmental Affairs for the American Soybean Association. And Kyle, first of all, welcome to Iowa. And we had a chance to network recently in which you laid out to soybean farmers from across the country some regulatory matters that need to be front and center as they think about their ability to operate and to be profitable. What issue or two, just top of mind, should Iowa soybean farmers be aware from a regulatory standpoint and what's being discussed in Washington, D.C.?
It's a great question. Right now, front and center on the minds, not just of ASA, but many of our grower partners from within states and other crops and commodities as well is how EPA is implementing the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act was enacted in the early 1970s. It's very much a statute of intending to make sure that if there's a project being built, a federal project, that it doesn't harm a species or their critical habitat. So a great example, if you're building a bridge over a river and there's an endangered turtle, how can we keep the bridge from harming the turtle? The challenge is, though, is increasingly federal judges in courts have found that it applies to pesticide registrations as well. And when you're thinking about pesticides that are registered for dozens of crop uses, used across hundreds of millions of acres, that intersect with all 1,600 endangered species, that's an enormous workload that the law wasn't necessarily intended for, but the agency's trying to have to figure out a way to make it work all the same. And we need them to, because if they don't, we're going to continue to see federal courts strike down pesticide registrations that growers are going to need to continue to operate.
In your comments to farmers here recently, you also made mention there are some regulations currently being discussed that could move quickly that soybean farmers need to be aware of.
That's right. EPA they'll be the first to tell you, they're under many court deadlines to get this work done. It's incredibly consuming. And so they're trying to find ways to develop efficiencies. How can we be more efficient if we're having to consume all these chemistries and all these species? How can we do it more concisely? And part of the way they're looking at doing that is grouping a bunch of things together, species or classes of chemistries, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, and putting in place sort of a blanket set of restrictions to make sure that they're going to be compliant with the Act. The level of restrictions they're looking to put in place is so restrictive and so onerous that on one hand they may be compliant with the law, but on the other hand it's going to make it really hard for growers to continue to use these tools.
If you're a farmer out there and you're growing soybeans and you're hearing this conversation and you know that you have the American Soybean Association in your corner, you have the non-checkoff work of the Iowa Soybean Association going to bat on this, but what should they do to really get up to speed on these issues? Because I'm sure farmers need to make their voice known on these. It's not like we're anti-regulation, but they have to be reasonable and workable.
That's right. They need to be reasonable, workable, and based in science and evidence. That's one of our key messages. The recommendations I would give to growers is work with your state and your national associations. Ask them to be monitoring this. Ask them what sort of proposals are out there. We were just commenting on one, we and many other grower organizations, on this one that EPA recently proposed, and there's some overlap with Iowa as well, where they've identified species that they thought were going to be uniquely vulnerable to pesticides. And they're going to put in place these blanket restrictions in these cases that are things like, for example, requiring you to consult with your local Fish and Wildlife 3 months ahead of making applications, requiring you to adopt up to 4 conservation practices on your land, and sometimes these can be very expensive practices to implement. When we talked to some of the growers who were in these areas, they said this could very well make or break their ability to continue farming. So for those growers, we just encourage them, get them plugged in with your state associations, ask them to monitor these, and then make sure that we're commenting and getting on the record what impact this is truly going to have on farmers. But the good news is that we've got a very, I think, robust network of staffers within all of the associations, state and national, that are working on these issues. And we've got an increasingly educated bunch that can really help explain it for individual growers. This is what this is going to mean for your operation. And here's how we can have you help weigh in a way that's going to be productive and help move the needle with regulators.
So what Kyle has just outlined is a really good example, scary example, of what's taking place, what's going on, places far away from where most soybeans are grown. And it's another illustration too of why there is and needs to be that close connection between the soybean farmer, their state associations, the work of the American Soybean Association. Monitor these issues and keep abreast of them. Reporting for this edition of the State of Soy, I'm Aaron Putsey.
Do you remember when you first believed that anything was possible? Do you remember when you had doubt, obstacles you couldn't overcome? Do you remember when you pushed through the pain and refused to quit? Remember, He created you for this.